And now, without further ado, I am very happy to, again in person, welcome Benjamin Duve. He will talk about the German securities, German electronic securities law. And the stage is yours, Benjamin. Your microphone is up there. Yeah, you can take it out if you,
All right. Yes, I'm here today to talk about the German electronic securities law, the case for an asset chain. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Philip, and the Frankfurt School Blockchain Center for once again bringing the community together. Collaborates and views is very important in this new space and a key to success. And that's what we also live at Commerzbank. I'm here as the head of digital assets. But actually, the result of my work is always the result of a collaboration of a cross-functional teams. A few of the names you find here, legal, tech, and others. Just 6 months ago, I was standing here and I talked about the hype that blockchain solves everything is over. Well, there was another Bitcoin hype in between we all are aware of, but at least what I can tell from an industry perspective, there's a much more substantial discussions of the real world problems in the industry, in market infrastructure, blockchain can solve, and all of that beyond the flashy headlines. Better, cheaper securities together, as an industry, was my take back then. And with the new German electronic securities law, we are now ready to get started. There are two main drivers for regulation in Germany and Europe, for DLT adoption, of course. And one I want to talk about here, and the second one I want to mention because it's important. The first one, of course, is the electronic securities law here in Germany. It has passed, and it applies to bearer bonds and funds. It introduces dematerialized securities and allows the use of DLT technologies for record keeping and more. For traditional securities, as well as for the new crypto securities, and that's, I think, a quite interesting take because it applies to two different kind of forms, I would say, of handling those assets. The traditional security, and that's very important, will require a central registry, while the crypto security offers quite a bit more flexibility. Crypto securities are a very interesting concept, but not the one I will talk about today. The pilot regime for market infrastructure is a European regulation, so it can address some other aspects. One, and that's a very limiting factor, is around the settlement of listed or exchange-traded securities and CSDR. So you currently would not be able to have a more decentralized solution for those securities because of the regulation and certain requirements around it. I'm hoping for quite a good outcome on this one as well. There's industry-wide discussions. We sit in many different groups to discuss about it. Let's see what it brings, but I hope it will bring a new impulse for innovation. There were 4 aspects I talked about last time which we could really address with DLT technology, and especially with regard to the securities I have in mind, OTC traded bonds. 3 of them we can now actually tackle with the new electronic securities law, while the 4th one, it's actually number 2 in the list. I used the same list as last time. We will not be able to address because of CSDR regulation, and the German law, of course, does not change European regulation. So that's very important to keep in mind. Again, I will discuss traditional bonds in a new format and not look at the crypto securities. The traditional securities require a central registry. I think that's important to keep in mind because from a certain perspective, it is a little counterintuitive to a more decentralized market infrastructure. And this is actually our vision, which was quite a bit refined discussions with different market participants, but also strongly influenced by our legal and tech colleagues who just gave me some hints and views on where we can and can't go. And it's a good sign and a good idea to collaborate because you avoid certain pitfalls, I can tell you. This idea is in no way final, but it's just a starting point for an industry discussion here in Germany. And I truly hope if you're a bank, you hold securities on behalf of or for your clients, just get in touch so we can have a discussion about it. As mentioned before, the asset to start with are OTC traded bonds and should be larger issuances aimed at institutional buy and hold investors. This reduces complexity on the one hand, as we have a quite new technology. I'm not sure how scalable it is yet because we really have not tested it as banks. We're not talking about crypto here, in market infrastructure which have a very different need for resilience and have to include a lot of different participants. But with that reduced complexity, but using larger issuances, you will be able to address and generate substantial cost savings in asset servicing and safekeeping, as well as speed as a relevant factor. So there is a business case right there. Under the new law, you can issue a current traditional bond, so nothing new, nothing fancy. So for the client, it's actually legally the same thing than the bonds they're currently buying and holding, and registered to a bank on behalf of its clients. So this is a very new concept because in the past, you were only able to do that by printing a security, putting it in the vault, and then moving on from there. Very different aspect because then you have a physical asset, you have to dematerialize it yourself and so on. There's no outside party who can validate that the asset exists. So a lot of topics around that. So you reduce that topic, that touch point around that physical security and use a central register. Now the bank can record ownership of said security bond to their client either via their current systems, but also via DLT solution. And I think that's another very major change the law introduces, the possibility to use DLT technology to do these functions around registration and others. I think we all here at the conference fully agree that everybody should use a DLT solution. That's nothing I have to convince you of here. But just to put it in perspective, this would be one out of two ways for a bank in Germany today to implement or operationalize digital assets. The other one, I think a lot of talked about here in these days, and will be a lot of talked about here in these days, is the crypto safekeeping, which is also regulatory compliant and possible for a bank in Germany. So very important aspects, operationalizing digital assets is something very different than talking about digital assets. A DLT network is established between the banks. You see it here as a dotted line. And that is the basis for the first asset chain. There is the caveat, and that's very important to keep in mind, that the change of ownership between banks, not in between clients of Bank A or in between clients of Bank B among each other, but between a client of Bank A and a client of Bank B, has to happen at the central register. A big difference and a break, of course, with certain aspects of a DLT technology. So it truly depends how DLT-friendly that central register is to really facilitate a smooth process, and there could be the need for a new, neutral, DLT-friendly register in the market. I always hope for one, because I do not believe it serves the banking and capital markets infrastructure well to have a strong fragmentalization. The asset chain we see is the beginning for a much broader chain, and in the beginning is only used, and that's important, to copy the token or bonds, not change legal ownership, but to copy the token or bond between banks, to communicate with each other, to share information, to organize corporate actions and other processes we currently have. It is not the legal representation of the token that is on said ledger in the beginning, because of the caveat I mentioned before, we need that central register. And we still need current systems because there are many functions we cannot perform on a ledger yet. There is no real cash all the banks probably could agree on right now. And there are also other processes where we might need current systems, but we should build a modular DLT solution, because that way you are able to start somewhere and then move the new functions on-chain. So just to re-emphasize, because I have a lot of discussions around this in the past, and people always seem to ask a lot of the same questions. So this might be a little bit repetitive, but I just want to make sure, especially the bankers and not the guys who are more into the DLT space, do truly understand what I'm talking about. We can do current bonds directly registered to the banks on behalf of their clients. A key concept which changes the setup we currently have in the market space. Banks can record ownership of their clients either via their current systems, but also via a DLT solution. So you have the ability to start with an internal DLT solution, to then move on from there, move other processes around, get your bank going in that direction. The transfer of bonds, for example, in our example, between two banks always happens on a central register. That's because of the limitations we thought of. Let's use current traditional bonds and not use some kind of new asset or asset class to make it more compelling to the current investors. The DLT network in the beginning is just there to copy the bonds or tokens, but it's already quite great, right? You have the token and you can move it from one bank to another. Everything is compatible. It strongly reduces a lot of the problems we might see today, but is still very decentralized. You can share information and communicate via the chain, because the other topic I hear everybody talk about, information in the market space, the value of information and so on, all of that now can be shared via that DLT solution. DVP, corporate actions, are processes we would like to do via DLT. That's important, but we might need current processes. I think there are certain limitations we currently still have, which we really should work on and then later move on chain, but there might be a hybrid model in the beginning. That's why I always say we need a modular DLT solution among banks with new features available once they become possible. And I think that's the key message. Let's get started somewhere and then build on that going forward. And to make sure everybody sees we didn't stop there, but of course we thought of the other potential components later on being built into said DLT network. the DLT network could grow with a decentralized registry. Maybe that's not the easiest to start with, but that's something you should truly keep in mind to reap the benefits of the underlying technology. We could add new securities, like funds, like crypto securities, like others. We could use cash on ledger and then enable certain DVP processes via the DLT network. We should keep an open mind here in Germany for a utility. We don't have it in the marketplace. We have several ones, several smaller players. But if you look at other major markets, there's one utility which handles a lot of the topics and really makes securities processing cheaper and more efficient. Let's do that here, but let's keep the options we have thanks to DLT technology there and keep competition for all functions. A very important aspect because we don't want the lock-ins. We went in the past with vendors or with certain parts of the market infrastructure. We need to be open for new members to not run the risk of have many different asset chains, have a fractionalized market space here in Germany that doesn't help anyone. And we might be able to include new jurisdictions to develop into something more of a European market infrastructure. This would be the first functional system in Europe, but we should work on standardization across different jurisdictions just to make sure also there we don't see a fragmentization or incompatible technology because I don't think it helps any of us. So just to put it in a little phrase and to mention something I saved for last. So the DLT solution we propose here could already save costs by combining different components of the current world with new technical solutions. So there's already either a saving or money you have available to invest in implementing DLT at your organization. And then, to save really the best for last, in theory, nobody has tried it yet because the law is just there, and there will be quite a few challenges to that. But from the law itself, you would be able to dematerialize current assets, for example bonds, and change the current holdings you already have onto the DLT solution. And as some of the bankers might know here, this could mean a very, very interesting business case just on its own. Thank you all for listening in. This is the quote I used the last time, and it has so much has changed over the last 6 months. I truly think the momentum is increasing and increasing. Things are getting faster and faster. The speed is picking up. So it's still a very fitting quote. That's how you can reach me, or anybody you know at Commerzbank, and they will get back to us. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I'm not sure how the format is, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Benjamin Duve, for the talk. And thank you for thanks to the audience, because there's been actually a record number of questions. Sadly, we only have a little bit more than 1.5 minutes.
I hope it doesn't mean my presentation was so bad that it's not very clear.
They are actually very, very good questions.
Okay, then.
Sadly, we only have like roughly 1 minute, so I'll just try to start and maybe we'll get to a second. Does the German electronic securities law include smart contract securities? Are there any standards, any shared?
There's nothing in the law, and that's why I say we need to start with a deal solution and then build in the different components while we need them, and also very importantly, to check what is legally possible. But I think certain components of smart contracts would work because we have certain settlement processes today. If you think about them, they're just a certain way of handling things in a certain way, one after another. Why not build that into a smart contract? But again, I'm not the lawyer.
Okay, great. Then maybe one short one.
Yes.
Will your system, systems you generally describe, be compatible to CBDCs?
Well, I hope it will, and it should, right? As I said, cash on ledger, settling cash is a very important component and a core component to market infrastructures for DVP. So I think we all should keep in mind and build an open system, because I don't know what the future really brings. And to be honest, I think nobody really knows exactly what the future looks like. So let's start to build something as modular as possible to include the new possibilities we are offered.
Great. Thank you for being
Thank
here,
you.
Benjamin. It was a great talk.